the new era of work. I want to extend a special thanks to our global sponsors of this event as well, that's Stanley Black & Decker, UPS, and the UN Generation Equality Forum. Today, we will discuss what it means to be an ally, why allyship is really an everyday practice, and how collaboration influences women's careers. Before I introduce our amazing panelists, let me briefly introduce myself. I'm Franziska Neumann and will be the moderator of today's session. I'm a manager with Connie, based in our New York office, where I transferred to from Berlin, Germany, about 3 years ago. In my day-to-day, I focus on large-scale transformations in the consumer goods space, and I'm passionate about anything HR and change management. Now coming to our amazing panelists who will share their stories of collaboration, their journey towards allyship, and what they've learned along the way with us. Starting off with Billy Chan. 26 years with UPS have taken you around the world, starting in Malaysia in 1996, all the way to Atlanta, Georgia since 2019. As the president of international sales and customer solutions, your passion is to enable UPS sales and solutions professionals on the front lines around the world, which the pandemic has drastically impacted. You were one of the early founders of the UPS APAC Women Leadership Committee. Billy, how has allyship influenced your career?
Once again, thank you for having me today and happy International Women's Day. Now, let me take you back to 30 years ago when my logistic career started. And again, back then, it was not an industry that most women would choose. And you can imagine my Asian parents' reaction when I told them about my decision. I promise you, there were no yelling, only a piece of really practical advice from them. They told me, do not injure yourself when you pick up heavy packages. Now, it was too complicated to explain to them what a sales job is, so I leave it just that. That, to me, is probably the most important allyship. Family and loved ones play a huge role to help break the bias. Now, 26 years with UPS, I have been fortunate. No surprise that there are many examples that I can give you on how allyship has helped me advance my experience. But there is one which is significant that I want to share today. This is about 20 years ago again. There was an operations manager job opening. And at that time, only male candidates were considered for the role. This was not uncommon back then because the logistic industry in the operations space was men's job, right? And the term unconscious bias was not even popular then. So I remember walking up to my male manager and asking him any reasons why I was not being considered. I wanted to know that it was because of my lack of experience or gaps in skills. Guess what? He looked at me and said, I didn't realize you were interested. And I replied, me too. I have to be honest, I wasn't sure if I was 100% ready for the job. But again, women has been found to be more critical of themselves. A very wise woman leader and ally once told me, who is 100% ready for their next job anyway? So I was given the role and became one of the very few women in logistic operations. And it was because of allyship. The leaders in the organization listened, acknowledged, and took action. So I think it is important for me to point out today that women do not want to be given a role because we are women. We want to be respected, valued equally, and given the same opportunities because we have earned it.
Great, thank you so much for sharing, Billy. I'm excited to hear more about that. Next up, we have Connie Lindsay. You concluded an impressive global career as the EVP and Head of Corporate Social Responsibility at Northern Trust, responsible for design and implementation of the global corporate social responsibility, community development and investment, and global diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. You're a former national board president of Girl Scouts of the USA, and you have been recognized for your leadership contributions by the Chicago United Business Leaders of Color Award, the National Diversity Council's Most Powerful and Influential Women Award, and the Chicago Urban League Humanitarian Award, to only name a few. Connie, how has allyship influenced your career?
Well, thank you for having me. It is wonderful to be here on International Women's Day and to talk about our history and to share stories and to engage and enlighten ourselves on our journeys. And so it is once again a privilege, and I thank you for having me. Allyship for me has been critical and crucial throughout my career. And as we talked about in preparation for the panel, I am rewired now into another career. I concluded my work at Northern Trust, wonderful global firm, and am now rewired into my humanitarian work and opportunities like this to help uplift women and others who might be marginalized or otherwise need additional opportunities. So allyship for me started early on in my career, graduating college. And the first job that I had in telecommunications, when my manager said to me, I don't really think you belong here. I think you're only here because of EEOC or laws or things like that. So I don't think you really belong here. Now imagine, at 21 when I graduated college, what that meant to me as a Black woman, an individual going into a large organization. Where allyship came in, there was my direct manager who was very, very clear about, potential and not promoting based on past experience, but potential. We'd have candid conversations about what that meant. And it manifested for me that allyship is really a common interest. And what was that common interest? That when we develop and grow leaders from diverse backgrounds and skills, it benefits the firm. And like Billy said, now this was a long time ago, several decades ago, when there weren't many examples around me, people with whom I could confer or even commiserate about what the experience was like. But that allyship, which came from a white male, was very important to me. And so I learned from that experience and ways to navigate that, because it wasn't a one and done experience, unfortunately, but I learned to navigate and how to develop the kind of courage, conviction, and commitment and the internal equipoise, as I call it, to move through my career, knowing what my skills and capabilities were, but it also really reinforced in me this notion of passion and compassion. And so I've become just a staunch ally for mentoring and sponsorship and coaching for others, critical and crucial to success.
Amazing. Thank you, Connie, for sharing that. I think that really resonated. Next up, we have Hilary Leeston. You had an exciting career across learning and development and human resources, which ultimately led you to becoming the CHRO of Walgreens. After leading the global HR business partner team in London in 2018, you came back to the US to become the CHRO at really the height of the pandemic in September 2020. The pandemic has drastically boosted the prominence of healthcare in every corner of the globe, and it has also shown the criticality of creating purpose for employees, which you've dedicated your career to. We're also very excited to have many attendees from Walgreens on the line with us today. Hilary, how has allyship influenced your career? You are on mute, Hilary.
Sorry about that. That's classic. Has to happen at least once today, right? So thanks so much for having me here today. It's really exciting to be able to join you all and discuss this important topic. Like many of you, I feel like I've had many experiences with allies helping me throughout my career, but in thinking about this, there's one particular example that really stands out to me. And it was a while ago in my career, and I'd been at about the same level in the organization. I'd moved into different types of roles, but I'd been at the same level for quite some time. And I really enjoyed those jobs. I didn't necessarily have aspirations to move up in the organization, and I wasn't really thinking actively about that and where my career could go. I kind of had my head down, did my work, and let the path lead me where it was going to lead me. And a more senior level leader in the organization, a man, gave me some unsolicited advice about that. And he shared that his observation was that I really was ready for the next step, but that I wasn't advocating for myself, and that others were noticing that. And in fact, that was in some ways leading to me not getting moved up, because they didn't see me demonstrating that that was important to me or something that I thought that I was ready for. So he helped shed some light on my experiences. He helped me to rethink a little bit about what I'd done and what that meant in terms of what I might be able to do next. And it did change my own approach. And I did begin to advocate for myself and think more explicitly about what I wanted in my career. And at the same time, he was advocating for me at the tables where decisions were being made about, career paths and particularly for the team that I was part of. And so collectively, I think those two things ultimately led to me getting a promotion. And I think it was a really pivotal time in my career because that shaped not only that step, but really kind of the future path for me. So I'm really grateful to him for seeing me, for taking the time and the action, I think, as you referenced, Billy, just to step forward and help. And it really made a difference to me. So I'm very grateful to him.
Great, thank you, Hilary. I think it's very interesting to see how different the experiences are, but how similar then in the importance of an ally for each of your steps.
Absolutely.
Last but not least, I want to introduce Lee McChesney. You've had an impressive career at Stanley Black & Decker, which led you to become the Vice President of Corporate Finance and the CFO of the Tools and Storage Division. You've been doing the math since 1999, while also serving on the board of directors for Junior Achievement of Central Maryland. Lee, how has allyship influenced your career?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to join this distinguished panel. It's a great question, and certainly I can speak as a role of an ally today. I think that's why I was included. So
Right.
I think we should go back, and hopefully we have some nice male participants today in our audience, and maybe over in the future here. But what is an ally supposed to do? They are supposed to really practice, emphasize inclusion. And they get the opportunity to do that because they are in the inclusion group. I'm a white male, so I have a wonderful opportunity, and so do so many others, to make sure allyship does happen here. And it's played a big role, and actually it goes back to just fairness. I mean, I believe in hard work, but I believe even more in equal opportunity for that same work, and that's fueled me. And I can think of several scenarios. I'll maybe share them a little bit later of moments where I spoke up, and I did it naturally, but it had a huge difference on that person. Sometimes I knew it right away. Sometimes they told me years later just how important it was. I gave them that encouragement to go for it, not to sit back, not to doubt themselves. So it can, and it's still out there. We've made a lot of progress, but there's still a lot of allyship out there for everyone to do. So I hope I can share some of that with us over the next hour.
Great. Thank you, Lee. Thanks for being here as an ally. And thank you all very much. I'm very excited to get the discussion going. To do so, please meet the moderator of today's session, Dominique Harris. She's an associate partner with Connie and based in Chicago. Her work centers around multi-year business transformation, and she's a passionate expert on a range of people-focused topics, including operating model design, learning and development, DEI, culture and change management. Dominique, I'll hand over to you to kick us off.
Thank you so much, Francesca. And I'm so excited to moderate this panel today. And good afternoon or evening or even morning for those who are joining us globally, possibly. So just listening to your introductions, I'm already hearing the theme of even just self-advocating and believing in yourself as a first step when we think about women really being able to move forward in their careers. And I look forward to unpacking that a bit more. But let's go back and kind of start at the beginning. Allyship has been given a few new names over the last 2 years: partnership, collaborator, and even one of my favorites, accomplice. And I think in many ways, that's because people are trying to strengthen the role and make it even more tangible so that more can participate as an ally or even know how to advocate for themselves. And so, Hilary, I'd like to start with you and really just understanding your perspective of what constitutes an ally and what's the motivation around being an ally.
Sure. Well, when I think about ally, you're right, Dominique. I think the definition has evolved over time, but I think at its heart, it's really about taking the time to educate yourself and to understand what is this story for other people. What are their barriers? What are the challenges that they face? And then taking action to help break down those barriers. And that can be in big forums in a systemic way. It can be in group forums, or it can be in a one-on-one setting, a little like the example that I shared that I experienced. And so I think all of those can play out in different ways and have a really big impact. And in terms of the motivation, for me, I guess it comes down to a couple of different things, and I think they'll probably be similar to what other people experience. The first one is my role, and I think each of us in our jobs have a role that can have an influence. But I do feel in the chief HR officer role, you have direct access to be able to make a difference in that systemic way. And so to me, it's an obligation. How can I be in this role, have the ability to change policies and programs and create opportunities and not do it? I have to. It's truly, it's part of the role in my view. But I also think then the data, unfortunately, demonstrates that there's still a need for this, and that's more broadly, and certainly within Walgreens still. And we see that. It's important, I think, that we review and understand our data and what's happening. And we unfortunately see that trend that many companies do of women and people of color not ascending into leadership positions at the same frequency as whites and men. So there's more work to be done there, and that's certainly compelling to understand why, what are the barriers, and what can we do there. And then lastly, I think the conversations, the stories, and I'm forever grateful for people who have opened up and shared their personal stories with me, because I think it helps you really on a deep level in your heart, to understand more. What are people experiencing and why does that matter? It's not just the data. The data is important, but that data represents a story for each individual. And so taking the time to hear those stories and people being vulnerable to share them is something that I find really important and influences my thinking and certainly motivates me to want to take action and help. So I think, these kinds of discussions like we're having today bring to light some of those things, and I hope are also inspiring for everyone joining today to be an ally.
I completely agree, Hilary. I'm hoping that the folks that we have on the line today, our audience, have some inspiration leaving this session to really play their role as an ally. And everyone has a role, to your point,
Absolutely.
as the HRO at Walgreens, but even those who are in the stores on the front lines, you have a role to be an ally.
Those are some of the most compelling stories that everyone everywhere can play a role, and it really makes a difference.
Absolutely. And so, Billy, you've had a global career, and I'm curious to understand, how does that change or evolve as you think about moving around the world? Does the role of an ally, the expectations of an ally, really change?
The short answer to that is no. So I think for me, allyship, we talk about allyship, and allyship for me is really about using our own position and power of privilege to foster a diverse and truly inclusive workplace. So really the role doesn't change. However, though, the dynamic of who has the power or privilege does. Especially so if you consider the different cultures across the globe that shapes the value and the personality of each individual. So therefore, I would say there are times that we need to be an ally, and there are also times that we need allies. I give you an example. So my husband and I moved from Singapore to Atlanta 3 years ago.
Okay.
It never crossed our mind that we became the minority so quickly. So as an Asian woman sitting in the meeting room here in the US, wanting to share an idea without trying to interrupt an ongoing conversation, trust me, not as easy as you think.
Yeah.
I had to adjust my approach, and did not take long for my allies to recognize that I needed them immediately. Now, I also wanted to quote that my 23-year-old daughter once reminded me that we were privileged. We were part of the privileged group when we were in Singapore, simply because we were the majority. And she said, by just having that privilege means it's at someone else's expense.
Huh.
So think about that. I did not realize that. So I will go back to that, yes. So everyone has the ability to be an ally if we recognize and understand our privilege and use this to support and advocate for those who don't have the same advantages.
Billy, thank you for sharing that story, and completely agree with you there. Such a powerful story to be able to share how your movement from one area of the world to another area, and this concept of privilege. We're going to dig into that in just a bit. I want to touch on one more question, and then we're going to go over to privilege and speak a bit more with Lee about that. But first, Connie, your career with the Girl Scouts Truly phenomenal. Can you speak a bit more in terms of what does allyship and collaboration mean in terms of young women, young girls, and how does your experience with Girl Scouts translate to corporate America? You know, earlier Billy had mentioned family and people in your personal life being very important to starting that and instilling that from a young child. Can you speak more to how that evolves as it moves into corporate America?
First, let me say my role at Girl Scouts was a volunteer role. So I had my full-time career and job while I did that. So that was a volunteer role. My passion for economic empowerment and leadership of women and girls, that's what drove me to that. I was a Girl Scout from the time I was 10, so I had direct experience of how Girl Scouts really does build girls of courage, confidence, and character who make the world a better place. So that was key to it. But when I think about allyship, Dominique, I think about it in terms of, allyship is a verb. And how do we distinguish allyship and advocacy? How do we distinguish an ally from an advocate? And there is a distinction, subtle, but a distinction. So an ally is someone who is experiencing that and wants to advance. And as we've talked about, how do I help advance whatever the cause is or that individual, understanding their perspective, educating themselves. And then the cross-cultural competence that's required. In my prior role, it was a global role as well. So, a lot of the things that we think about in our country, in the United States or wherever we are, we want to superimpose that at times on other countries. But having that cross-cultural competence when I'm being an ally for someone, and that was the true in Girl Scouts because that's a global organization. I needed to best understand what it meant to be a girl in Mexico or a girl in another part of the world. What did that allyship look like? And how was I best able to answer and direct that, to advocate in a way that made sense for them and that they could derive and develop that level of confidence? I needed to train and understand. Education is so important to that, and to really listen. The whole notion that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. And for young girls, really understanding what it was that they were facing. How do we change even the Girl Scouts program? But most importantly, equally as important in corporate, how do I show up? Am I so comfortable with my privilege in a role or a position that I might attain that I'm not going to do anything to rock the boat? And Hilary is absolutely right. The notion of systems and structures that preclude advancement, no matter how ambitious you are, how well educated you are, those systems and structures and those barriers have to be moved. And we need allies to do that. Those people who are courageous and earnest enough to make sure that those things are taken apart. And finally, I'd say in my work at Northern, we took an approach of looking at both the data as well as the quantitative and the qualitative view of what it meant to advance culture in the organization that was more inclusive.
Thank you, Connie. Completely agree. When taking allyship further into inclusion, it really gets into, well, how do you break down some of those systems and structures? And the journey of allyship really begins at individual edification that can ultimately transform organizations. And when you think about members of privileged communities or in groups, they can be motivated to be allies for various reasons. And so, Lee, can you tell us a bit more about your story and how have you become an effective ally? What are some of your learnings?
Yeah, Dominique, it's a great question. I mean, I can go a couple of different places, but I want to stay in one world here of number one, getting involved. Like we're doing today. If you're listening today, you are getting involved, and because it really starts with participation. Because it's simple to maybe sit aside and see it, but you got to get involved, and that's really resonated with me. And when you choose to do that, as Connie just said, do listening. Take listening to heart. It says, yes, I wanted to get involved. I wanted to help, but I'd probably say in the beginning, I had a belief in my mind of just what I needed to do, and I had the data, but I had to do the listening, and the listening was powerful. The gift of hearing the stories of struggle only motivated me more, but it more importantly brought clarity of how I can help. And the last couple of years have shown just I really appreciate more than I ever have how hard it is to take care of young children and work, whether it's in the virtual world or in this hybrid world. I didn't really appreciate that enough. Even though I had my own kids, just a different environment, really understanding that. And it's changed, also just more flexible, more open to different ways as you go forward here. So there's many ways you can go, but again, follow the data, yes, but do listen, and then more importantly, act. There's a lot of talk, but you got to demonstrate when you follow those facts, you follow those stories, take action to improve the situation. Because in many cases, like a lot of things, it just does need action. It just needs action and needs someone committed to doing it.
Thank you, Lee. That definitely resonates to listen. We've heard that a few times at this point. Listen, seek to understand, but then also to go ahead and take action at some point. Go ahead and lean into that. And so, how can, I guess, let me also just shift gears a bit more to your organizations, right? All of you have been part of global, multi-billion dollar organizations, hundreds of thousands of employees. And to some extent, organizational structures have a role in helping to build allies and making it a space for allies to grow. And so organizations appeal to allies even more and really bring them more to the forefront to kind of join on the journey. Connie, do you want to start us out there with that question?
So I think what you're asking is, how do you make it more ubiquitous within the organization as it relates to allies? I think that's critical, and is, first of all, it's for the allies to show up. Right? We're going to listen, we're going to educate ourselves, we make the commitment, and then we have to show up. One of the ways at Northern Trust that was done was through what we called our business resource councils, understanding and celebrating the uniqueness of individuals, whatever their diverse aspect happens to be, but creating what I call safe space for us to talk about our unique aspects. And then within the construct of the organization, how does that help improve the bottom line, product and services? How does that all come together? I often talk about how diversity, equity, and inclusion is a business imperative. It is not just doing the right thing. That is an expectation and a requirement. How is it a business imperative? Now, I'm not saying the business case for diversity, because if you want to really get me annoyed, talk about the business case for diversity, because to me, it's saying that I have to, as a diverse person, justify my very existence and my being. But the business case for diversity is that when we think about and understand the market broadly and the requirements of diverse potential clients or whatever that might happen to be, we then are best able to meet that need. So diversity drives inclusion. Diversity in and of itself without strategy and proper execution changes nothing. But diversity drives inclusion. Inclusion then should be buttressed by equity, which is not the same as equality, because equality assumes we all start from the same place. Equity gives us what we need to be successful. And then that really does help to drive the kind of innovation and bottom line. So let's create within the organization whatever ways that we can bring in all that talent. Make sure that as it applies to our core business or strategy, that we're executing along with that, and you will see the outcomes. Not easy by any means, but as allies, we have to show up. There's a friend of mine who always says, if you're not at the table, you might find yourself on the menu. So if I am an ally and we're having a discussion, I need to make sure that the people for whom I am practicing allyship don't wind up on the menu. And which then means the part of, I want to see more diversity in that room so that we can have a broader voice and greater impact.
I see all the hearts and hand claps in the chat here. Connie, I think that really resonated with everyone. You have to show up, but also don't make me prove why I'm here and why there is a business case around myself. So let's continue to dig into that a bit more. But love to hear in terms of Stanley Black & Decker, Walgreens, UPS, what are mechanisms or things you're putting in place to build on this sense of allyship and to foster an environment? Connie mentioned BRGs. For those who are on the line, it's similar to ERGs or affinity networks. I know Hilary, Women of WBA is a huge ERG. Would you like to start off, and I could turn over to Lee and Billy after?
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking one of the things that I think has been most impactful is we started a series we call Brave Conversations, where we invite, it started with a leadership team, and then we have cascaded that into different parts of the organization. But we bring a group together and we bring a panel together similar to this, and it's team members in different levels in the organization, and they share their experiences in a very candid and brave way. And I mean, in some cases, these were people who I've known for 20 years, worked with, and consider, someone I'm close with, and I had no idea some of the experiences they had. Even now I get, goosebumps just thinking about some of the things that they've faced at Walgreens, let alone, more broadly. And so hearing that discussion and hearing the conversation amongst those people with a broad audience, and then discussion, we did breakout groups so people could discuss that and to hear, what did you, or to discuss rather what they heard, and then also what actions they can take to try to help these types of situations in the future. I just think it opened the dialogue and it opened a lot of eyes, mine included, I think, to again, those stories and what people are experiencing. So it sort of lights a bit of a fire to motivate people to take action. That's been really, really important, I think.
That's a great example. And one thing that it made me think about, the person who's sharing that story, you have to be a bit vulnerable.
Very, very.
Open to sharing. Because we've mentioned of several times, allies need to listen, but then you also have a role to share your story and share what you need, right?
Yes. And we had to recognize that. I think it was taxing on those individuals, and we really appreciate it. And bold. There were reasons they hadn't shared those stories in all those years, but it was really impactful that they did. So very grateful to all who participated.
Thank you, Hilary. Billy, Lee, anything you want to add there?
I think everybody talked about we still have a lot of work to do in this area. There's no doubt about it. And we have to continue to be intentional about it. So I would say that initiatives like BRG and a lot of other programs out there is definitely necessary, and particularly in the current hybrid environment where a lot of our employees are not able to gather at a hallway for informal discussions and stuff like that. So I would say that it is important to continue with the allyship spirit, regardless of the work sector. Right? Always invite different voices to the table, to the Zoom call, and always challenge ourselves as to, do we have the balanced representation on every call or every decision that we're trying to make?
Dominique, could I add one quick thing? I think when Hilary talked about that vulnerability, Billy talked about it. And then for us as allies, I call it holding space for one another, it's important that we not insert ourselves in the narrative. And we did similar things at Northern Trust. We'd have opportunities for people to talk about their experience. And I learned things as well from people with whom I worked, the pain, whether it was perhaps they'd had cancer and they were recovering from that, and how did that impact them? But the whole point of, if I'm listening to you, truly listening, which is, active, that I don't say, oh yes, guess what? And that's what happened to me. Or I have a friend who did that. So that allyship really is listening without inserting myself into the narrative, but that vulnerability that it brings, and understanding that once we hear that, we have the responsibility to hold that sacred for that person who is sharing that information with us.
Dominique, I would add this, maybe a bit practical. My CFO nature will come through here a little bit. If we take from all this need for listening, and we did some wonderful thing with our employee resource groups, we listened a lot. And then we do have our commitment to the Paradigm for Parity by 2030 as a company. And we won't get there by just talking and some little actions. We got to take substantial action. So we let that entire team speak. And then we came up with all the different ideas. And really, they came up with a list of what we're going to do to change the trajectory of our company. And now we're into the implementation mode. I do think that at some point you got to go through these earlier stages, and then you got to move into what do we need to do. You got to test it, make sure, if I do those things, it's going to take me there, and then you got to get going. So I think that's an opportunity for others to follow as well.
Thank you for explaining that process. And yes, you got to take it a step further and do more than just listen. That's super helpful. And so let's continue. We almost could start a whole nother discussion about vulnerability and safe spaces, etc. But maybe I want to go back to what Billy briefly touched on. We're in a new environment. I mean, this event alone, I'm thankful because we can all come together from different parts of the U.S. and different backgrounds. But let's face it, 5 years ago, who knows if we would have been able to make this group come together, because we would have wanted to do it in person and we would have had other constructs in place. But now the virtual environment has broken down some of those barriers, but in some ways have put up other barriers. and other blind walls that we may not see. And so the role of the ally has to continue to evolve in this hybrid environment as masks come off or stay on and doors open and people get back into seats or some stay at home. How does the role of the ally change in that sense or evolve to be accommodating? Billy, do you want to speak a bit to how to think about that and how you bring people to the table?
Yeah, sure. So the way I look at it is the hybrid model, in fact, has opened up a lot of opportunities for us to invite more voices or voices that should be at the table. I think that's an opportunity there. I know that if you were to look at the other side of the spectrum as to, hey, you're not able to do that casual hallway discussion, but at the same time, like I said, before you send out any invite for any calls, look through the list. Who else do we need to include in that invite? So I'll say that has to continue going. And I also want to reinforce that allyship is also not about always agreeing with each other at the workplace. Really, it's about everything that the leaders here talk about. Is about being inclusive, listen, exchange conversations, and learn from each other. Also, the other point is I spoke earlier about recognizing your power of privilege. It is so important. Often enough, privilege is not something that is very visible, and sometimes it require us to do self-reflection, that many of us don't recognize them. And sometimes for those that we recognize them, we may not even know how to react as to what action should I take. So like UPS, for example, we are currently piloting with Lean In's Allyship at Work program as part of our DEI efforts. Initiatives like this help employees understand their privilege, position of power, and learn specific actions to take so that they can show up as ally at work every day. So my short answer to that is continue to use that in the different setup. And again, the world is dynamic. You may have different, some part of the world may open up tomorrow and some part may go backwards. But just remember this before you send out an invite, look through the list, then learn the power of your privilege, as well as understand what action you can take when you get to the meeting.
I love that, Billy. I know I've been fortunate to participate in a privilege to exercise in the past. And, yes, I am a Black woman, but I have privileges as well that I needed to be made aware of to understand then how I can harness this power to build more inclusion. Lee, can you build on that? How do you think we need to either evolve in this hybrid environment, but also what does inclusion look like?
Yeah, it's a great point. So we all have to really take to heart that the work environment has changed. So we like to talk a lot about VUCA and the world of VUCA and what it means. And so we've talked already today about listening, but one might argue, well, geez, I did a listening session a year ago, so I'm good. I'm going to do that next year. Things like that. We have to keep listening, keep touching base. And I mean, for many of us, and you look at the last couple of years, if you had joined an organization, you know them primarily through the screen here and through a financial transaction. You have to evolve from that, because that will not work on a long term. So again, those listening sessions then you turn into a need to act even quicker than before in this VUCA environment to really what the needs of the organization are. So, again, if you're listening, you hear about things that you can't talk about it for 6 or 9 months. You got to act within weeks in many cases in this environment, because otherwise it will just become this kind of transactional interaction with your employees. And we're trying to build in this hybrid environment. And the reality is it isn't going to go back to what it was before. It is this new hybrid world, and we got to make sure we've adopted to that. Again, those things we thought we could do to drive more inclusion, they may not work now. And I think we got to continue to adopt it. Again, what may work right now may be something different we have to do next year as well.
Absolutely rightly. And I'm going to go a little off script with my panelists here, but we're flowing together well, so I think I can do that. We've had a few comments in the chat, and building on this topic of inclusion and harnessing that power, there's this, the comment in the chat was, but you can also raise awareness of biases. And Hilary and Connie, I'm interested to hear your perspectives on that's absolutely right. As you start to learn more about your privilege and your power to build the inclusive communities, you may also become more aware of your blind spots or those biases, or that you may have unconscious biases you're not aware of. And so what are your thoughts on that topic of biases and the role organizations play with helping employees understand those?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I really think grounding back to that listening and creating those forums for people to be exposed, because unfortunately, sometimes it's the same. Well, we all have biases. We all, we don't know what we don't know in some cases. Some people are more inclined to outreach and try to learn about that, and others are less inclined to do so. So I think organizations have an obligation to try to create those forums in order to have everyone here and learn, because there were many, aha moments. I think during those sessions that I was describing, lots of people were struck by, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this was the case, and started to reflect on their own. In fact, one of those happened on screen between two panelists, and it was a white male and an African-American male, and the African-American male was describing a particular situation he'd faced, and the white male was so affected by it because he'd undergone the same circumstance but had an entirely different experience, and it helped him to realize all the dynamics around that led to that different experience for him, and all the steps he didn't have to take whereas the other gentleman did. So I think creating those forums and not just taking a passive approach, but helping everyone to be exposed to things that they might not otherwise have access to or be actively seeking out. I think that makes a big difference.
So I think it's absolutely true. Unconscious biases are those biases that we don't know about. And, research has shown there's probably over 200 of them. But it is those biases that can create exclusion or preclude the advancement of other people that we can look at, measure, and affect within our institutions. So if I have a bias that I prefer, strawberry ice cream versus vanilla, that isn't necessarily going to rock anybody's world unless it's, whatever that is. But if I am in HR, and my bias is that I only want people who've gone to Ivy League schools, then that has a deleterious impact on anyone who did not graduate from an Ivy League school. In a hybrid work environment, when I think about biases, and as Billy talked about, looking at who's coming to the meeting, I need to have enough insight to know who is or who is not going to speak. There are ways that we as leaders must adapt ourselves and train and make sure that our own biases aren't manifested because some folks talk more than others or they're quiet. How do we respectfully bring others into the conversation? Or the bias that some managers have or leaders have that I need to have people in the office in seats. And finally, I'd say that, we all worked remotely, but we didn't all work the same. Some of us have said, and I agree, we're all in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. Some of us experienced the pandemic on yachts, others in life rafts, others on. So let us think about that as we think about our own biases with, you should be able to stay at home, as Lee talked about, people who have caregiving responsibility. They're working remotely is not the same as an individual who doesn't have those kinds of responsibilities. So let's focus on the biases that preclude others from having advancement and opportunity. Let's think about in this hybrid work environment, we're not all working in the same way. How do we bring out and challenge ourselves and become comfortable with being uncomfortable as allies to challenge and ask those questions? Used to always challenge my team, and I still ask a more beautiful question. You get a more beautiful answer, and keep walking through that until you get to that answer where one of the things I love about children is that they continue to ask why. And anyone who has children, right? And if you're the caregiver or the parent, you're like, oh my goodness, because I said so, usually is how it ends. But they ask why. But that more beautiful question really gets then to the heart of the matter. Why is it that I prefer XYZ as it relates to inclusion, and how do we make sure we move through that? That's how I think about bias and us moving through that, to Lee's point, because I measure things. My own predilection is to really think about how do we measure those outcomes. We're going to talk about it, but at the end of the day, we're going to hold people accountable for those things to which we've agreed.
So many great nuggets there. I saw the fire coming in the chat once again, but the visualization that, hey, we all went through the storm, but we weren't all in the same type of boat is something to definitely take away there. And I think we could continue to build on this conversation. I guess, maybe let's get a little uncomfortable a bit, because, there's a fear to being an ally, right? There's a fear that I don't know what my biases are. I may say the wrong thing. I may offend and may not be able to come back from it. And so I'm curious to maybe have a conversation here with this group, because you've said so many great things thus far and given so many great actionable things people can do. How can we break down that fear of being an ally, and what does it mean to lean forward and advocate for someone else? Even if you're coming from the marginalized communities, you can be an ally, and there's a role that you play. And so, Lee or Billy, do you have an example of maybe how you've coached others to be an ally and overcome that fear?
Yeah, I'll be happy to jump in. Because I've had those same fears, Dominique. It's a great question. And I have said the wrong thing, and maybe with the right intention, but I think it comes back to a lot of what we talked about before. The more you just explore and listen, the less you'll have of that, and the more comfort you'll have, and you'll build. And I think if you do that, you get to have these conversations we talked about earlier. People open up to. They see you as a safe person to talk to, and it's as rewarding it is to you as when they share these stories. You become motivated to continue to not just maybe put your toe in there, now lean in with everything and see what you can do. I'm going to go back to even where I started. Again, I said I believe in hard work, but I believe in equality more. And just as a human being, you have to rally around. In today's world, you come back to that point. What is the right thing to do? Equal opportunity for everyone. And if I see an opportunity to bring that forward, actually, yes, there's a fear, but there's an excitement that I can leave that change afterwards and really be part of what is just a really big missed opportunity in organizations by not engaging everyone and not letting them really bring all who they are to work every day. So I'll just start with that today.
Great point, Lee. And visualization there, it made me think about some of my biggest moments in my life personally. I had a little bit of fear before I went in. There's a little bit that motivated me. There's an excitement on the other side of that, an accomplishment. So being able to lean in and being okay that you may make those mistakes. And on the other side, the person receiving understanding to have maybe positive intent, so you can be forgiving. Billy, is there anything that you would add there?
I agree with Lee, right? So I can tell you up to today, I still have fear. But the fear will be bigger if you don't get involved.
Right.
Think about the fear, think about what the environment is going to be if we say nothing. Saying the wrong thing is probably better than saying nothing sometimes in this case, but we can all learn, right? We can prepare ourselves. Like conversation like this was spark us to think about, if I want to get involved the next time, what are some of the key words? All you need to do is just ask questions. Things like, if you see a woman colleague being interrupted halfway through the conversation, we can always say, hey, why don't we let her finish first? If you see somebody claim her credit because it's from an idea from her, it's like, hey, thank you, Connie, I remember you mentioned this, it's a great idea. Things like that. I think we can all read up a little bit, and participating in forum like this, we can all learn. And again, look at the big picture. Not doing anything is even a more dangerous environment. That's the danger zone that you don't want to go.
Dominic, can I add three quick things really quick, I promise. First,
Go
Connie,
ahead.
I love what you said about intent. One of the tenets that I live by is assume positive intent in doing the diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Assume positive intent. Number two is for us to really think about words matter. And so that whole part about educating ourselves, one of the things we did at Northern Trust is we actually created a website so that people could understand what it meant. The word, using the term Black in the United States of America has a totally different context in using the term Black in India. Once again,
Absolutely.
educating ourselves, cross-cultural context is so important. And then the third part of the whole role of allyship is one of the things we did at Northern was we created reverse mentoring as a program. So for our I reported to our CEO, and so for our management group, our first group we started with men as allies for women. And so we assigned a woman who was a senior vice president in the firm and different race and ethnicity so that you could have a trusted relationship with that person and perhaps ask those questions that might make you uncomfortable. And we did it for each group, for LGBTQI, all of those, but that is the real hands-on, Billy. It's like you said, I might be concerned, but I can come to my mentee and say, how do I become a better ally around working moms or working parents? Or how can I become a better ally around disability? So those are the actions, the commitment that you make, and the vulnerability of saying, I'm going to be paired with a person from a different culture, different language, or whatever that might be, but we're going to have a relationship. And it was 3 months of mentoring and conversations to work through that. And the responses were good. So I'd offer that as something that you can actually do. Assume positive intent and then do some reverse mentoring. You find out lots of interesting things.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you for building on Billy there. I think that makes a lot of sense. Positive intent, words matter. The reverse mentorship, we do that here at Connie as well. I've been a product of it and truly enjoy the relationship. Now, there was a little fear going in. I was like, oh no, this is very senior person, but it's worked out very well. 3 years later, now we have an ongoing relationship and I can truly call him an ally for me. So I think continuing, Billy, Connie, the whole Hilary, Lee, you're all making very actionable recommendations here for our audience, and I love it. Let's continue to build. I guess, Hilary, are there things you might want to add in this environment as we've talked about fear, and maybe let's turn it into a bit more of wellness and well-being and whatnot. And so if we go that route a bit more as well, the role of an ally, and how do you stay well as an ally, but how do you also help others in their well-being as an ally?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about this, and I think it's so relevant right now because I think health and well-being and particularly mental health have come so into the forefront over these last 2 years as we've all struggled with that. And I think we're at this critical junction right now. In the last 2 years, it's been a change for all of us, but some of the good things, if you can say that came out of the pandemic were, I think, that increased focus. Lee, I think you mentioned this, on people, whole people. We're not just an employee. We bring a lot more to that. Even when we're in the workplace, there's more to us. So I think, valuing things like taking a walk when you need a mental break or a physical health break there, or things even just like picking up your children, but even culture dynamics like take the time you need to heal. If you're sick, get better. Don't like, well, you've been out 2 days, isn't it time for you to come back in? Those kinds of things that I think have taken a toll on us over time were put into the spotlight. So I think as we're at this point now where a lot of companies are starting to think about returning to work and for office type roles, allies are going to play a really critical role here in helping to keep that culture in the right direction. I'm afraid it could be quite easy for people to slip back and into old habits here. And we need everyone, not just, at all levels, I think, to be advocating for maintaining those things, maintaining the value of people's whole lives, and supporting that health and well-being. And otherwise, it can be daunting to speak up for what you need, and to take care of the things that you need to for yourself. And so allies are going to play, I think, a really critical role there. And I guess the only other piece to that as well is I think just emotionally, it makes a difference to know that there are people on your side and advocating for you. You're not alone in this effort. If you have these needs and things that are important to you and you feel like there's nobody speaking up on your behalf or recognizing the importance of it, that in itself takes a toll emotionally and on your well-being, I think. So I think it's just, I just think of this time we're in right now, and it's just this precision point of like, let's get working together here to help make the right pivot as we take this step forward.
Oh, excellent points, Hilary. And so as we come into the last 5 minutes here of our session, we did receive a question on how to best find an ally. And so that's the last question I want to do a round robin on with all of our panelists. And as you think about your response there, I'll just summarize for our group. You know, there's been a few themes that we've heard throughout our session today. One, self-advocacy of yourself, putting yourself in the game. But then two, as an ally, really going through a series of activities of seeking to understand, listening, asking the why, looking at the data, and then leading in and taking action. And so all of our panelists have provided very actionable steps, looking at the invites, pulling people into conversations. But now let's turn to how can you find your ally? And for the women on the line, how can they find someone who can be an ally for them? And so who would like to kick us off with this final round robin?
Hey, Dominic, maybe I can take a shot at that. And I say that ask for it. Don't be afraid to ask for it. If you know that you have people around you that you respect, you want to learn from, and walk up to them and say that, hey, can I have some conversation with you, or can you be my mentor, or can I check with you and can I discuss certain topic with you? So I think is sometimes we got to seize those opportunity ourselves. We got to raise our hands and say, I want that, and go get them and ask for it.
Yeah.
That's what I would do.
Yeah. I think the same thing. I think absolutely asking, and most people would be honored to be asked to play that role, and it gives them the opportunity to learn, again, kind of going back to what we were just discussing in that reverse mentorship. There's so much opportunity for all involved in that scenario. So sometimes people don't know the impact that they can have, and they're reluctant to offer something like that or to start the conversation. So I agree on asking. The other thing too is I think the business resource groups are absolutely phenomenal. The work that they do, and so thank you to everyone on the line who's involved in those because the education that they provide for the overall organization, the spotlight that they put on really important issues is critical. And I think that's a broad way, to start to funnel that information out, the need for it. So it's not maybe necessarily the one-on-one place to get an ally, but it's a place to help advocate for the importance of allies within an organization. So I think that's important too.
I distinguish between an ally and a mentor. That ally
Yes.
may not necessarily be the mentor. I mean, that ally, I'd say, is someone who, is advocating on your behalf for things. So watch and see what people do. You can generally tell who the ally is because they are going to be a little more courageous than other people. They're going to be speaking about those things that might make others uncomfortable in situations where they can assert their influence and have great impact. Mentors, the etymology of the word is a trusted advisor, important to have. But those allies that I think about and the ones that I've experienced in my career, I've observed them because they are in those places where they are talking about people who might not look like themselves. That's when I think about looking for an ally and then developing the relationship, because relationship is so critical about that. And finally, I'd say in this liminal space in which we find ourselves today, the space between no longer and not yet, it's really understanding what it is that each of us can do to support one another in relationship, asking those more beautiful questions, and then really working hard to develop ourselves so that we recognize where we can become allies or how we identify allies who can support us.
Thank you, Connie. Lee, do you have a final thought?
I would just add on, those are beautiful thoughts. Swing big. Look for the person who, maybe is in the role that you aspire for, but also does it the way you like, just the way they go about it, the way they interact with people. I am delighted when people reach out to me. So yes, I help. I'm a wonderful ally, but I frankly think I become a better leader because of those interactions. So again, go find one, and not just one, find a couple, and take the benefit of it.
Well, thank you so much, Connie, Billy, Hilary, Lee. This has been a phenomenal session. I know our audience has taken away actionable things to do and really understand that all of them, everyone has a role to be an ally. For those on the line, thank you for joining us for our International Women's Day Forum. We have another event tomorrow at 11 a.m. Central Time, Purpose and Legacy. Going to be another fun session. Again, thank you to our panelists and have a great rest of the day, everybody.